I never thought the hardest thing I'd ever do would be closing a door. But that night, 2 years ago, I did exactly that. I stood in the fancy entrance of our big house just outside Charlotte with a small bag at my feet. Behind me, the house was completely silent, except for my father's voice still ringing in my ears. "You walk out that door, Alice, and you are no longer my daughter." I remember how tightly I held the bag strap. My mother was crying somewhere upstairs. The house staff had disappeared like they always did when my father got angry. I just stood there for a second, breathing in the smell of the lilies my mother had ordered from Ecuador that morning. Then I opened the door and stepped into the warm Carolina night. My name is Alice Allen. For 28 years, I had been the carefully raised daughter of Richard Allen, founder and CEO of Allen Enterprises. Private schools, summers in Aspen, an MBA from Duke that I didn't even get to choose. My life had been planned down to the smallest detail, and I had almost married the man my father picked for me, Preston Caldwell III, because saying no had never really felt like an option. Until Joshua Hayes. I met him on a rainy Thursday afternoon when my car started making a terrible sound on the highway. I pulled into a small garage in a neighborhood I'd never been to before. He came out wearing a faded gray t-shirt with oil on the sleeve, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't look at me like I was an Allen. He just smiled, calm and steady, and said, "Let's take a look." 3 hours later, we were sitting on folding chairs in his garage, drinking terrible coffee, talking about everything and nothing. He told me he'd put himself through engineering school while working nights. He told me he liked fixing things more than managing people. He told me life was too short to spend it becoming someone you didn't recognize in the mirror. I think I fell in love with him between his second and third cup of coffee. For 11 months, I lived two lives, corporate daughter by day, his by night, until the night of the engagement party my parents threw at our estate, the night I stood in the garden wearing a $14,000 dress, listening to my father announce my future to 300 people, and realized I was suffocating. I called Joshua from behind the rose bushes, tears burning my eyes. "I can't do this," I whispered. His voice, soft, certain, a little shaky, answered, "Then don't, Alice. Come home to me." So I did. I left the party, I left the mansion, I left the version of me they had spent a lifetime building, and I drove straight to his small apartment on the edge of town. That was the night my real life began. Starting over. The first month in Joshua's apartment felt like learning to breathe underwater. It was a 2-bedroom place in a regular neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just clean walls, used furniture, and windows that looked out over a parking lot instead of beautiful lawns. The kitchen smelled faintly of whatever the last person had burned on the stove. At night, you could hear the highway in the distance. I got a job at a small consulting firm downtown, entry level, no fancy office, no assistant, just me, a laptop, and a stack of files that didn't care who my father was. The first time I had to fill out my own expense report, my hands shook. I'd never paid for gas before, never clipped a coupon, never stood in line at the grocery store wondering if I had enough money. But every evening Joshua came home from the garage smelling like motor oil and possibility. He'd kiss the top of my head while I stood at the stove trying to figure out how to cook chicken without a personal chef, and he'd say, "You're doing it, Alice. You're really doing it." Those words kept me going when my mother called from blocked numbers, her voice soft and shaking. "Alice, sweetheart, this isn't you. Come home. Your father's ready to forgive everything." I'd hang up before the tears started. My father didn't call. He didn't have to. The credit card stopped. The trust fund vanished. Even the health insurance I'd had since birth was suddenly gone. One afternoon, I sat in the break room at work and stared at the rejection email from my old firm. Someone had made a quiet call. I knew who. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake next to Joshua, listening to his steady breathing, and wonder if I'd ruined both our lives. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. and not recognize the person looking back. Then Joshua would wake up, pull me close, and whisper against my hair, "I see you, Alice. Not the money, not the name, just you." The wedding. That winter, we decided to get married. No big announcement, no fancy invitations, just a quiet ceremony at a little pavilion on the shore of Lake Norman. The kind of place where families bring coolers and kids run barefoot through the grass. I wore a simple white dress I found on sale at a department store. Joshua wore a suit he'd rented for $40. Our friends brought folding chairs and homemade potato salad. The morning of the wedding, I got a text from my mother. "We'll be there. One last chance to come to your senses." I showed it to Joshua in the car. He read it, then looked at me for a long moment. "It's your day," he said. "Whatever you want." I wanted them there, not because I needed their approval anymore, but because some part of me still hoped they could see me, the real me, standing in the sunlight without a trust fund to hold me up. They arrived just as the music started, my father in a dark suit that probably cost more than our entire apartment, my mother clutching a handkerchief like it was a lifeline. They stood at the very back, not smiling, not moving. At the reception, burgers on a grill, string lights in the trees, my mother cornered me by the picnic tables. "Darling, it's not too late," she whispered, her eyes looking toward Joshua, who was laughing with his friends. "Preston would still take you back. Think of the life you're throwing away." My father appeared beside her, jaw tight. "This is your last chance, Alice. Stay with him and you'll never see a dime. Is that what you want? To scrape by for the rest of your life?" I looked at Joshua again. He was teaching a little girl how to flip a burger, flour on his cheek, completely at ease. Then I looked at my parents, trapped in the same cage I'd just escaped. "What I want," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months, "is to be happy, and he makes me happy. If that's not enough for you, then maybe you were never supposed to be part of this anyway." My father's mouth opened, then closed. He turned and walked away without another word. My mother hesitated, then followed, heel sinking into the grass. The shift. That first year after the wedding was quieter than I expected. We settled into a normal rhythm. Mornings started with coffee and mismatched mugs at our tiny kitchen table. Joshua would kiss me goodbye before heading to the garage, and I'd drive downtown to work. Evenings, we cooked simple meals, pasta, grilled cheese, whatever was on sale, and talked about nothing important. That something in Joshua had started to shift. It was small at first, a late night here and there, phone calls he'd take in the other room, voice low. He'd come home smelling like the shop, but there was a restlessness in his eyes I couldn't quite name. I told myself it was the master's program he was finishing, night classes, long hours. I told myself a lot of things. One ordinary Friday, I left work early. I'd picked up takeout from our favorite little Thai place, the one with the sticky rice we both loved. I wanted to surprise him, but the apartment was empty. A note on the counter in his handwriting. "Working late at the shop. Love you." I stood there holding the warm bag and felt the first real crack of doubt. Not panic yet, just that low, familiar ache I thought I'd left behind in my father's house. I couldn't sit still. I got back in the car and drove toward the garage. The sun was setting, turning the highway gold. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing through every late night, every vague explanation. When I pulled up to the shop, the lights were off. His truck wasn't there. The knot in my stomach tightened. I called him, straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Hayes, Please come to 1873 Tryon Street. It's about your husband." The address was in uptown Charlotte, glass towers and valet parking, a world away from our little suburb. My heart started to hammer. I typed the address into my GPS with shaking fingers and drove. The truth. The building was sleek, modern, all sharp lines and reflective glass. Security gates opened before I even reached them. A guard in a crisp uniform nodded as I pulled in. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, respectful, almost gentle. "Executive elevator to the top floor." I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime. My reflection stared back at me, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot. I looked like someone who belonged in a 2-bedroom apartment, not whatever waited at the top of this tower. The doors opened into a vast, hushed space. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline. The air smelled faintly of leather and something clean, expensive. And there, standing at a wide glass desk with his back to me, was Joshua, but not the Joshua I knew. Gone were the faded jeans and oil-stained shirts. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly combed. He looked like he belonged in rooms like this. He turned slowly, and when his eyes met mine, there was something in them I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, just a quiet kind of courage. "Alice," he said, voice soft, almost reverent, "it's time I told you everything." Before I could answer, the door behind me opened, and the past walked in. My father, my mother, and Preston Caldwell stepped into the room like they'd been summoned. My father's face was already hardening into that familiar mask of control. My mother clutched her purse like a shield. Joshua didn't flinch. He simply reached for my hand, his fingers warm and steady around mine. My father's eyes flicked from Joshua to me, then back again. "What the hell is this?" Joshua's voice stayed even, almost gentle. "Mr. Allen, Mrs. Allen, Preston, I asked you here tonight because it's time we all spoke plainly." He turned to me then, his eyes soft. "Alice," he said, "when we met, I was already building something bigger than the garage, Hayes Dynamics. We make the batteries that power the next generation of electric vehicles, the kind every major manufacturer is fighting over." He paused, letting the words settle. "I made the decision early on not to tell you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to know what you saw when you looked at me. I'd spent years watching people fall in love with the idea of me, the money, the name, the future they thought I represented. But you fell for the man who showed up in a tow truck, the one who fixed your car and talked about life like it was something you got to choose." I felt the breath leave my lungs. The pieces clicked into place. All those late nights, the quiet phone calls, the way he'd come home smelling like possibility instead of defeat. "You let me walk away from everything," I whispered. "You let me struggle. You let me choose you when I had no idea what I was really choosing." He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. "I needed to know you choose me anyway, and you did, every single day." My father made a sound, half laugh, half choke. "Hayes Dynamics, the company that just secured patents half the industry would kill for?" Joshua turned to him, calm as ever. "Yes, sir, and the woman standing beside me became my largest shareholder the day we said I do." The silence that followed pressed against my ribs. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Preston's face drained of color. My father recovered first, though his voice had lost its thunder. "You let us believe she was throwing her life away. You let us cut her off." "I let her find herself," Joshua said quietly, "without the weight of your expectations, without the fear of disappointing you. She built a life with me from nothing, and she did it with more grace and courage than I've ever seen in a boardroom." He looked at me again, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not triumph, not revenge, Just release. I stepped forward, still holding Joshua's hand. Daddy, I said, the word feeling both foreign and familiar. Daddy, you taught me that Allens never settle for second best, so I didn't. I married the best man I've ever known, and I did it without knowing he could buy the company you've spent your life building. My mother's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. Alice, we were wrong, she said, her voice breaking. We thought we were protecting you. You thought love had a price tag, I finished softly, and maybe it did once, but not anymore. My father stood very still, the fight draining from his shoulders. For the first time in my life, he looked at me like he was seeing a stranger, and maybe he was. Joshua's voice cut through the quiet, measured and final. We don't need your money, we don't need your approval, but if you want to be part of our lives, if you want to know the woman your daughter has become, you'll have to meet us where we are. No conditions, no ultimatums, just family. He squeezed my hand once, gently, and in that squeeze, I felt the truth settle deep in my bones. I hadn't lost everything when I walked out of that mansion. I had finally found it. After. The hour that followed in that glass tower felt like the quiet after a long storm. My father and Joshua sat at the wide table, voices low and careful, speaking as equals for the first time. My mother hovered near me, her hand brushing my arm like she was afraid I might vanish again. Preston had slipped out without a word. Later that night, back in our little apartment, with the takeout long gone cold, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all evening. Why the garage? Why any of this when you could have had everything? Joshua pulled me onto the couch, my head against his shoulder, the city lights flickering through the blinds. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. The garage keeps me honest, he said. It reminds me who I was before any of this. And these months with you, paying bills, burning dinner, laughing in the dark, they've been the truest thing I've ever known. I needed to know we could build something real, not because of what I could give you, but because of who we are when nothing else is there. I closed my eyes and let the tears come, soft and steady, not from pain, from the deep relief of being seen so completely. New beginning. We didn't move into some mansion after that. We found a small house in a neighborhood near Lake Norman. Nothing grand, just a backyard big enough for a dog we hadn't gotten yet, and windows that let in the morning light. I started working with Hayes Dynamics, leading their foundation, helping young people who reminded me of the man I fell in love with, the ones with big ideas and empty pockets. Joshua still spends 2 days a week at the original shop, sleeves rolled up, teaching kids how to fix engines and, more importantly, how to fix their own paths. My parents, they're trying. Mom calls on Sundays now, her voice lighter, asking about recipes and whether we need anything. Dad comes by sometimes, sits on our porch with Joshua, talking about classic cars and the way the world is changing. There are still moments when the old sharpness creeps in, but they catch it now. They're learning what it means to love someone without trying to own them. Looking back, I realized the real miracle wasn't the reveal in that tower. It was the months before it, the ones where I learned I could stand on my own, where I discovered that freedom isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to keep going anyway. Joshua and I still drive past that old apartment sometimes, or stop at the Thai place on South Boulevard. He still looks at me the same way he did the day my car broke down, like I'm the most interesting problem he's ever wanted to solve. Because in the end, love doesn't care about titles or towers or trust funds. It cares about the quiet nights, the shared silences, the way two people choose each other again and again, even when the world tells them they shouldn't. And we did. We still do. Thank you for sitting with me in the quiet tonight. Every story like this reminds us that the strongest hearts are often the ones that learn to beat on their own. If this one stayed with you, stay with us at Revenge Ties, where every confession leads to another kind of freedom. If it moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone.